Hi everybody, welcome to Pragmatic Gita. This is Krishna Dasa, the servant of Krishna. And in today's episode, we will start with chapter 2, which is also known as Sankhya Yoga. And before we start, let's invoke the Guru Mantra and the mantra to God. Om Ajnanati Mirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuram Militamena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So in this chapter, Arjuna again tells Krishna that he is unable to cope with his current state of mind, and he refuses to take part in such a battle and requests Shri Kṛṣṇa to be his spiritual teacher and clear his doubts and impart the divine knowledge that will help him understand various aspects of life. This is the chapter where Supreme Lord starts imparting divine knowledge to Arjuna, and he begins with the nature of the soul, which is eternal and imperishable. Krishna also explains to Arjuna the importance of doing one's prescribed duties under all circumstances. With each teaching, Arjuna comes up with more questions, and then Krishna goes deeper into various aspects of spiritual science. This is also the chapter where Shri Kṛṣṇa is referred to as Bhagwan, or God, for the first time in the Bhagavad Gita. The second chapter can be considered the most important chapter of the Bhagavad Gita and is also the largest, with 72 verses. Lord Krishna has condensed the knowledge of Gita in this chapter, and in subsequent chapters he goes on to expand upon various concepts. The way the Bhagavad Gita is organized is that chapter 1 is the preparation or introduction, chapter 2 is the condensed essence of the whole Gita, and chapter 18 is the summary of everything that's contained in the Gita. Since ancient times, all Hindu philosophical teachings have been categorized as belonging to either the Astika or Nastika schools of thought. Astika means those who acknowledge the existence of a higher self or God, whereas Nastika means those who do not acknowledge the existence of a higher self or God. Needless to say, Bhagavad Gita is part of Vedanta, which belongs to the Astika school of thought. Samkhya or Sankhya refers to one of the 6 Astika schools of ancient Hindu philosophy. Those schools are Nyaya, which is school of logical thinking; Vaisheshika, objective nature of the universe; Samkhya, study of topics like the soul, nature, and energy; Yoga, study of body and mind; Mimamsa, science of introspection and critical investigation; and Vedanta, which is the study of the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutras. In the context of the Bhagavad Gita, the most important aspect of Sankhya philosophy that Lord Krishna explains is that of the nature of Purusha, or higher self, Prakriti, which is nature, and the 3 modes of nature, which is Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Sattva stands for goodness, Rajas stands for passion, and Tamas stands for ignorance. The first chapter ended with the depressed Arjuna in a state of nervous breakdown. In chapter 2, Krishna starts addressing this situation and helps Arjuna overcome it. One thing to keep in mind is that just like Arjuna, whenever we are in a state of depression or nervous breakdown, we lose the ability to think objectively and clearly. It is during these times that we must seek the guidance of some bona fide authority or guru. In this instance, Arjuna seeks guidance from the supreme authority, Lord Krishna. The second chapter can be classified into 4 main topics. First topic is Arjuna Sharanagati, which is total surrender of Arjuna. This happens between verse 1 to verse 10. The second topic is Jnana Yoga, which is part of Sankhya Yoga, and this is between verse 11 and verse 38. The third topic is Karma Yoga, or Yoga of Action, which is from verse 39 to 53. And the fourth topic is Sthita Pragya Lakshanani, the traits of those who are steady of mind and wisdom, which is from verse 54 to 72. The interesting thing is Sthita Pragya is a word which is unique to Gita. It is not present in the Upanishads or the Vedas. Ved Vyas Ji especially coined it for the Gita. Sthita means established. Pragya means our wisdom or intellect. Sthita Pragya means a person whose state of mind is very balanced and who is undisturbed even in the face of calamities while actively performing their duties. It's very easy to have a balanced state of mind for those who have renounced everything and who spend all their lives in a cave in some mountain. However, Shri Kṛṣṇa is referring to a person who is actively involved in the struggles of daily life, who is actively performing their duties, and yet is able to maintain a balanced state of mind. That is the state of mind that we all must strive to attain. In verse 2.54, Arjuna asks Krishna details about a person who is a Sthita Pragya, and we will learn more about this when we discuss that verse. Fear causes weakness of mind, and this in turn causes all the miseries in our lives. The more spiritual we become, the more fearless, strong, and compassionate we become. With spiritual progress, we become able to combine two great virtues, fearlessness and compassion. In the 12th chapter, Shri Kṛṣṇa will say, "He or she is my true devotee, the one who is strong and fearless, and yet is compassionate to all beings. He doesn't fear anybody, and nobody needs to fear him also, because he is so gentle." So that is the whole subject of the Bhagavad Gita, to help us grow and develop ourselves, become spiritual and fearless and compassionate. We need to understand that the word war is only in the first chapter, and you do not see that word anywhere in the rest of the Bhagavad Gita. So this is not really a book on war. This is a book on human development and fulfillment. As we are embarking upon this journey of spiritual wisdom, I wanted to share another quick note. Lord Shri Kṛṣṇa has given an ocean of wisdom and knowledge in the Gita. However, to understand it the way he meant it to be understood, we should develop our mind to be like that of Arjuna. There are many lessons to be learned from Arjuna as well. As per the example set by Arjuna, it is okay to question. It is okay to feel confused or depressed. However, it is necessary to have humility and surrender to the Lord and seek His guidance and blessings to overcome everything. Every living entity has a lesson to teach us. Even a blade of grass has a lesson to teach us. Let us try to have this mindset and surrender ourselves to the Lord with absolute humility. During my association with advanced devotees, I have been told many times about their experiences and how pride becomes the main hindrance in our path towards getting closer to Krishna, and how Krishna will always try to destroy our pride before He helps us. Ego or pride is a big barrier to spiritual growth. When a person becomes egoistic, they lose the ability to realize God. We have to keep reminding ourselves of this. Now, with this background, let's start looking at the first 3 verses of chapter 2. Sanjaya, who is the minister in the court of Dhritarashtra, he starts the second chapter by observing Krishna getting ready to address Arjuna. Here, Sanjaya and Arjuna refer to Krishna as Madhusudana, which means the slayer of the demon Madhu. Srila Prabhupada tells us that by referring to Krishna in this way, Arjuna is poetically indicating that Krishna should now slay Arjuna's doubts, just as he had slain the demon Madhu. Krishna is addressed as Madhusudana at least 5 times in the Gita. A very interesting aspect to this is that Lord Krishna did not kill the demon Madhu. It was actually Lord Vishnu himself who had killed Madhu through his Hayagriva incarnation, which was an incarnation of a horse-like body and is mentioned in the ancient scriptures known as Puranas. So by referring to Krishna as Madhusudana, he is actually being referred to and accepted as Lord Vishnu himself. The core teachings of the Bhagavad Gita start after first establishing the fact that Krishna was an incarnation of God himself and that he was accepted that way by Arjuna and other learned seers of his times. Lord Krishna starts his discourse by explaining that we cannot run away from our problems because the problems will keep chasing us until we learn to face them. In verse 2.2, Krishna asks a very strong question to Arjuna. Krishna says, Kutastva kashmalamidam vishame samupastitam anarijustam asvargyam kirtikaram Arjuna. Which means, from where have you got this bad attitude, Arjuna? Krishna uses the word kashmalam, which is the Sanskrit word signifying all that is bad. Lord Krishna says, Anarijustam, a noble-minded person will never take to this kind of attitude. Another thing to keep in mind is that Arya is not a race. Rather, it implies a noble-minded person. Even Buddha spoke of his teachings as Arya Satyani, the noble truths. In case of mental breakdowns, the patient is given a shock treatment. Here, Lord Krishna is giving the shock treatment to Arjuna, which he never expected. Arjuna was hoping that Krishna will take pity on him, Krishna will please his senses as Govinda, Krishna will say some nice things to him, so on and so forth. But Krishna actually decides to give him a shock treatment and wake him up. In the next verse, 2.3, Krishna says another very powerful statement. He says, Klaibyam masma gamaha partha naitatva yupapadyate shudram hridaya dorbalyam tyaktavotishta parantapaha. Now, Klaibyam is a strong word which means unmanliness. It also means impotence. So Krishna is telling Arjuna that this kind of unmanliness does not befit you. It does not suit you, Arjuna. This is such a great lesson in human psychology. Krishna says such behavior does not suit a great and noble person like yourself. This is the right way to coach others, especially juniors and children. Instead of saying, oh, you are so stupid, how could you do that? We should instead highlight the strength of the person and say something like, you are such an intelligent person. Such behavior does not suit you. This will do wonders to the other person and actually help them overcome their weakness without feeling lowly about themselves. Let us try to practice this as much as we can. The concept that we are essentially divine, all this weakness that we experience is not our true form. There is something profound about us. That is the basic teaching of Vedanta. Through these two verses, we can extract the first pragma or practical tip from Krishna, which is recognize the saboteur within you. Don't give in to it. Confront it and vanquish it. Our inner saboteur is like a thief, and a thief's biggest fear is getting caught. So we just have to be aware of our thoughts and recognize when our inner saboteur is playing games with our mind. The very act of being aware and catching the saboteur in action is enough to control and defeat it. So these are the most important lessons that we can learn from the first 3 verses of the second chapter. Thank you so much, and looking forward to be with you in my next episode where we will cover the remaining verses of chapter 2. Hare Krishna. In the previous episode, we discussed the importance of recognizing the saboteur within ourselves and the need for confronting and vanquishing it. In this episode, we will cover the Bhagavad Gita verses 2.4 to 2.13. Now, Shri Kṛṣṇa knew that Arjuna was in a very emotional state of mind and needs to be pacified with knowledge. Because as per Krishna, knowledge and intelligence are the greatest tools we can use to rid ourselves of ignorance and succeed in our spiritual as well as material endeavors. Arjuna felt that the great warriors Bhishma, Dronacharya, and Kripacharya were his seniors and worthy of his respect. He would not even dare argue with them, let alone battle with them. He felt that it would be a sin to battle them, and if he was victorious, he would not be able to enjoy the victory. So instead, Arjuna says he would rather let them kill him in battle unarmed. However, the fact was that these great warriors had taken the side of the unrighteous Kauravas based on their various obligations to the wicked Duryodhana. So it was not a sin to battle them and kill them in war if required. In fact, before his death, Bhishma himself said that a teacher who acts immorally and takes the side of the unrighteousness or adharma is fit to be abandoned. Here you can see what an emotional state of mind did to Arjuna. He, one of the greatest warriors of his times, was considering suicide. So Krishna had to calm his mind and sharpen his intellect by imparting the knowledge of Samkhya Yoga in this chapter. One of the lessons here is that you should not say or do anything when you are in a very emotional state of mind, because whatever you say or do will not be correct. Our feelings should be controlled by intelligence. You can try an experiment. Next time you are trying to type an angry email or message to someone, just save it without sending it and look at that message the next day. You will invariably tone down and modify the message. You may even feel shocked that you had written such harsh words. An interesting point to note is that Arjuna deeply respected Bhishma, Drona, and Shalya, who was Nakul and Sahadev's maternal uncle. He had requested them to fight on his side or remain neutral. However, all three of them said that they were bound by their duty to serve Kauravas. Basically, they all received wealth and material support from Kauravas, and that made them become obliged to the Kauravas, and they had to fight on their side. In the Bhishma Parva of the Mahabharata, it is said that man is the servant of wealth. Wealth is never the servant of anybody. So the other important lesson in life is that we should be very careful from whom we accept monetary help and support, because otherwise we may land up becoming obliged to serve the wrong kind of people. If possible, we should avoid seeking monetary help from others. If we are compelled to seek monetary help from others, then we should be extremely careful who we are seeking it from. Otherwise, we may end up in bondage and suffering. This is a very important lesson for us. In verse 2.7, Arjuna says, Karpanya dosho pahat svabhavaha prichami tvam dharma samudha chetaha yat shreyah syanishchittam bruhi tanme sishyaste ham shadi mam tvam prapannam. Which means, I have behaved in a cowardly manner. I am confused. I take recourse to your superior wisdom. My wisdom fails me here. You are my guru. Accept me as your student and teach me what is best for me. This is a very important turning point in Arjuna's life. Here he admits that he is confused and he is seeking wisdom from Krishna. He is acknowledging Krishna to be his guru. See, until this point, Arjuna was seeing only a friend in Shri Kṛṣṇa. However, from this point onwards, he sees a guru in Krishna and requests him to accept him as a student and teach him what is best for him. It is only when a student surrenders to the guru will the guru begin to teach. Unsought advice is not allowed in Vedanta. Unless you seek something, what is given to you has no value. We should also keep this in mind. If we just go on giving things to people who are not seeking it, what we give will have no value, be it knowledge or material thing. The guru is given a lot of importance in Vedic literature. Sant Kabir has written some insightful lines about the importance of a guru. He has said, Guru Govind dohu kade kaake lagu paaye, balihari guru aapne Govind diyo bataye. So someone is asking Kabir, my guru and my God are both standing in front of me. Who should I pay my respects to first? Sant Kabir responds and says, first bow down to your guru, because he is the one who taught you how to recognize and reach God. Krishna is the original supreme guru, imparting the divine knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, and Arjuna is his first disciple for getting this knowledge on behalf of all of humanity. In these verses, you will see that Arjuna starts to get his clarity and his depression is no more there. He is beginning to realize that he has been overtaken by weak-heartedness. However, he admits that he is still overcome by grief, anxiety, and sadness, and feels incapable of fighting the righteous war. He really needs the help of the Guru to overcome his weakness of heart and get the required clarity. Now Arjuna, the student, is ready for receiving knowledge. And from the next verse onwards, Shri Kṛṣṇa will start imparting that divine knowledge to Arjuna. In his commentary on this part of the Gita, Swami Vivekananda quotes from the Katha Upanishad, which says, Uttishtata Jagrata Prapya Varan Nibodhata, which means, arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached. Our goal in life should be for self-realization leading to God-realization. We must first open our eyes to this reality. We must seek the guidance and stop not until we have reached that absolute goal. Right in the middle of the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Arjuna was getting anxious, depressed, and he was going through a nervous breakdown. Whereas Shri Kṛṣṇa was fully composed and calm. In verse 2.10, Krishna is referred to as Rishikesa, meaning the master of the senses. Because Shri Kṛṣṇa had such a tremendous control over his senses as well as the situation. In verse 2.10, the term used is prahasan iva, which means smiling like that. Shri Kṛṣṇa could smile in that situation, in between two vast armies, right before the start of a great war. We cannot smile when we are in distress. That smile shows the control Krishna had over the situation. With a smile on his face, from verse 2.11 to 2.38, Shri Kṛṣṇa uses various reasoning and counter-arguments to help Arjuna get rid of his confusion and see the big picture. From 2.39 onwards, Krishna explains his own philosophy for the welfare of not just Arjuna, but that of whole of humanity. Shri Kṛṣṇa's philosophy that he goes on to explain to Arjuna will help us all in our battles of life and in facing the various challenges that it throws at us. In 2.11, Shri Kṛṣṇa tells Arjuna that you are speaking wise words like that of a Pandita, and yet you are grieving for the potential loss of the human body. Actually, Shri Kṛṣṇa is demonstrating his sense of humor by addressing Arjuna as Pandita. In Sanskrit, the word Pandita refers to intellectually advanced people who have an even-minded attitude towards everything. They are people who have control over their minds and who are established in intelligence. We have seen that Arjuna was definitely not behaving like a Pandita. So Shri Kṛṣṇa is calling Arjuna as Pandita, both as a taunt as well as a hint on how he is supposed to have control over his mind and behave like a Pandita instead of just talking like one. Now let us try to understand the basics of Sankhya Yoga. In Sanskrit, the word Sharira is used to denote our body. As documented in the Vedas and explained in the Sankhya Yoga, we have three types of bodies. The first type is called Karana Sharira, or the causal body. The second type is called Sukshma Sharira, which is the subtle body. And then we have the Sthula Sharira, which is the gross body. The causal body, or Karana Sharira, is actually the seed that gives rise to the subtle body. Until one achieves the stage of liberation, the subtle body is indestructible. Jiva, or soul, is of two types: liberated, which is known as Mukta, and conditioned, which is known as Baddha. The liberated souls are eternally engaged in the service of God in His abode. They never fall down to the lower planets. Whereas the conditioned souls have forgotten the service of God since time immemorial, and thus being covered by the two types of material bodies, gross and subtle, they are suffering from miseries in the material world. We should understand this. and we should stop giving too much importance to the gross body. We should get over the fear of death and strive hard to attain liberation through devotional service to God. The body we have when we are an adult is entirely different from the body that we had when we were a baby. Yet, we still feel that we are the same person. So we cannot really be the body because we identify ourselves with something higher, something that has not changed since we were a baby. This thought process should help us realize that we are not our material body. We are the soul which is eternal, just as God is eternal. In 2.13, Shri Kṛṣṇa explains how the human body goes through various stages from childhood to adulthood and old age. He explains that this evolution continues, and after we leave this body, our soul gets another body as per our karmic entitlement. This process continues until we have settled our karmic balances and realized the true eternal self, after which we get liberation from the cycle of birth and death. The great Sufi saint Rumi wrote a beautiful poem which Swami Mukundananda quotes while explaining these verses. The poem goes like this: I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and became an animal. I died as an animal and I was human. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Yet once more I shall die to soar with angels blessed. But even from angelhood I must pass on. All except God perishes. Only when I have given up my angel soul shall I become what no mind has ever conceived. Oh, let me not exist, for non-existence proclaims in organ tones, to God we shall return. This concept of the soul being eternal and passing on from body to body has been accepted by many religions and cultures. This is the same truth that is explained in Sankhya Yoga that Shri Kṛṣṇa is now teaching to Arjuna. The soul being eternal and the body being very temporary is a very important and crucial concept that is central to all of Vedanta. Once we understand and accept this fact, we will be able to understand and appreciate the rest of the teachings of Shri Kṛṣṇa. In the next episode, we will start with verse 2.14 and we will see a lot of other interesting teachings from Shri Kṛṣṇa. The verses 2.14 to 2.21. In the previous episode, Krishna had explained the importance of the Guru, self-realization, and the true nature of the self. Here today, we start with verse 2.14. Matrasparshastu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukkhada agama payino nityastan stitikshasva bharata. Which means, the contact between the senses and the sense objects gives rise to perceptions of happiness and distress, which are very temporary. Just like summer and winters, these perceptions are all temporary, and we should learn to tolerate them with a calm mind. This is another important verse that lays the foundation of Krishna's philosophy that helps us reach the state of Sthita Prajna, a person of steady mind, which Krishna will explain more in detail in the last few verses of this chapter. In verse 2.15, Krishna addresses Arjuna as Purusharshava, which means best among men. Krishna is bringing the best out of Arjuna. And he says that one who is steady and not disturbed by the dualities of nature is eligible for liberation. In other words, achieving mukti or liberation is possible only when we are able to maintain the calmness of our mind. It's a very important concept. Now, this does not mean that we become totally emotionless. It's okay to feel happy or sad. We should just not get too excited in good times or too agitated during bad times. The easiest way to achieve this is to always tell ourselves that even this will pass. This applies to both good as well as bad times. And it will help us stay grounded and calm under all situations. When we are feeling very emotional, regardless of whether it's positive or negative emotions, we should not say or do anything impulsively, because whatever we do or say will not be appropriate or in our best interests. The great saint Sai Baba of Shirdi gives us the secret to handling all the ups and downs in life just using 2 words. He says, Shraddha and Saburi, which means have faith in yourself and in the Lord and practice patience and perseverance. Here is a wonderful example from Ramayana, the great epic Ramayana. Lord Rama's father, the great king Dasharatha, was once rescued from the battlefield by his wife Kaikeyi. It was quite natural for him to feel grateful and thankful. However, brimming with extreme emotion, he promises Kaikeyi that he will grant her any 2 wishes. This promise is what lands up causing him to lose his sons Rama and Lakshmana, along with his daughter-in-law Sita. It was his emotion that made the promise, not his intellect. This one mistake, committed in a state of extreme emotion, laid the foundation of an entire epic called Ramayana. Now, this was an example where someone acted unwisely in a state of extreme positive emotion. We have to similarly be careful when we are in a state of extreme negative emotion and refrain from unwise acts during that period. When we are very sad or very angry, we should refrain from saying anything. A classic example is that of Parikshit Maharaj, the son of Abhimanyu. Once, while hunting in the forest, he gets lost. After wandering for many hours, he is very tired and thirsty, and he comes across a hermitage. There, a great saint by the name of Vibhandak was sitting, deep in meditation, and he had taken an oath of silence until his meditation was over. Now we should remember that saints and sages, they never broke their oath. Once an oath is taken, they will stick to it, even if it costs them their lives. Now the king was not aware of this oath, and he started asking him questions that the rishi could not answer. But the king, because he did not know about the oath, he just assumed that the saint was being disrespectful to him. And so he got very angry. He saw a dead snake lying on the ground. He picked it up, put it on the rishi's neck, and went away. Now, putting a dead snake on a saint's neck is actually a big insult, because a dead animal is considered impure, and the saint was sitting there performing meditation, which is an act of purity. Now, when the rishi's son, whose name was Shringin, came to know about this, he got extremely angry, and he cursed Parikshit to die from a snake bite within 7 days. Now, Parikshit was actually a very pious king, and he had done a lot to ensure that holy men and saints could carry on Vedic practices without any hindrance. However, his one wrong act done in a state of anger caused him to be cursed by Shringin, who was also acting out of anger. So as you can see, anger begets anger and creates a negative sequence of events which can be very destructive to everyone involved. Now, when the sage found out about the curse, he scolded Shringin and told him that his education was not complete as long as he failed to gain control over his anger. And he sent him away to do penance in the forest. On the other hand, Parikshit Maharaj is very sad about how his life was ending. And he comes across Sukadev Goswami in the Naimisharanya forest and asks him questions about what knowledge should he be receiving before he dies. And Suta Goswami gives him the knowledge of Srimad Bhagavatam. So here comes the second pragma, or second practical tip from Shri Kṛṣṇa, which is a calm mind is essential for liberation. We should learn to handle pain and pleasure calmly. Now, starting from 2.17, the terms Sat and Asat are used. These mean true and false, and they also mean real and unreal. Asat is ever changing. Sat is never changing. The physical body and everything we perceive via our physical senses are asat because they are ever changing. And so we should not cling on to these temporary things. In the Holy Guru Granth Sahib that the Sikhs follow, it's mentioned that Aad Sach, Jugad Sach, Hai Bhi Sach, Nanak Hosi Bhi Sach. Which means true in the primal beginning, true throughout the ages, true here and now, O Nanak, forever and ever true. That is the nature of Sat, or the absolute truth. Now when it comes to Asat, more than 2,500 years ago, the great Greek philosopher Heraclitus famously said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man." What a beautiful philosophy. That's a classic example of the ever-changing nature of all things material. Truth is eternal, never changing. So whatever changes cannot be the truth. It has to be unreal. It has to be an illusion. Another great philosopher, Aristotle, said, "The whole is greater than the sum of the parts." And this holds true for humans. We are greater than the sum of our body parts. Don't you think so? Someone in the USA did a detailed analysis of all the chemicals and components an average human body is made up of. And they calculated that the total cost of all the chemicals and other materials that our body consists of would cost less than $50. Is that what we are worth? $50? Of course not. We know that human life is priceless, so it has to be more than just the physical body. Now, a great saint, Ramana Maharishi, encouraged his disciples to introspect about the true nature of the self by the art of negation. And his lecture is titled Nan Yar, which in the Tamil language means, "Who am I?" Ramana Maharishi was so advanced and such an enlightened soul that he could communicate with his students without speaking a single word. Just by his mere presence, he was able to communicate his thoughts to his students. Now, coming back to his method of introspection, his method was very simple. Imagine that you have lost your hands. Will you still be you? If so, you were not your hands. Now imagine you have lost your legs. Will you still be you? Of course. Now continue this method for each of your body parts, and you will realize that you are not defined by any of your body parts. So what exactly is that you? That is your consciousness, your soul. That is the real you. This soul is described in Vedic literature as being smaller than 1/10,000th part of the upper portion of the hair point in size. In the Svetasvatara Upanishad, it is written, "Palagra sata bhagasya satada kalpitasya cha bhago jiva sa vijneya sa chanantyaya kalpate," which means when the upper point of a hair is divided into 100 parts, and again each of such part is further divided into 100 parts, each such part is the measurement of the dimension of the spirit soul. In the Maundakya Upanishad, it is also said that the soul is atomic in size and can be perceived by perfect intelligence. This atomic soul is floating in 5 kinds of air, which are called as prana, apana, vyana, samana, and udana. And it is situated within the heart and spreads its influence all over the body of the embodied living entities. When the soul is purified from the contamination of the 5 kinds of material air, its spiritual influence is exhibited. That is the goal of all the yogas. Shri Kṛṣṇa explains this indestructible nature of the soul to Arjuna and tells him that only the body perishes. The soul itself is indestructible and eternal. So he asks Arjuna to become aware of this truth and fight for dharma without any more confusion. In verse 2.19, Shri Kṛṣṇa says that those who think that the soul is the killer or the soul is getting killed lack knowledge, because the soul does not kill and the soul can never be killed. Interestingly, taking inspiration from these verses in the Bhagavad Gita, the American philosopher and poet Ralph Waldo Emerson has written a poem called Brahma. The first paragraph of that poem goes like this: if the red slayer thinks he slays, or if the slain thinks he is slain, they know not well the subtle ways I keep and pass and turn again. As we discussed in verse 2.16 to 2.18, we are not this physical body. We are something higher. We are the soul, which is the absolute truth. Our ultimate goal in life is to realize this truth. Whether we believe in it or don't believe in it doesn't change the truth. Just like gravity is not going to change whether you believe in it or don't believe in it. Shri Kṛṣṇa is explaining this truth to all of humanity through his message to Arjuna, that the soul is eternal and it can never be destroyed. It is beyond life and death. If you ask what is unique about humans and what makes us superior to animals, it is this ability to realize this ultimate truth. Now, today's machines are getting smarter than humans. However, neither machines nor any of the animals have this unique ability to realize this truth. Using our mind and our senses and our intellect, we can at the most theorize this truth, but we cannot realize this truth. Then how can we realize this truth? That is the teaching of the whole of Gita. Vedanta tells us that there are 5 causes of suffering. The first cause is avidya, which is ignorance, not knowing who we are. The second cause is raga, or attachment, clinging to things that are impermanent and having expectations. The third cause is dvesha, aversions. Dvesha is avoiding and running away from things that cause us unhappiness. The fourth cause is asmita, or egoism, identifying with the ego and creating separate realities. And the fifth cause is abhinivesha, which is fear and anxiety, especially fear of death. Vedanta also gives us the solutions to overcome them. It tells us that by correcting the first cause, which is avidya or ignorance, and realizing who we really are, we become free from the effects of all the other causes. Yoga, which means the union of body, mind, and spirit, is rediscovering who we are and returning to a life of joy, bliss, and freedom. Vedanta, recognizing that we each have different personalities and preferences, offers us 4 paths of yoga to help us reach this goal. Each person, depending on their abilities and preferences, can choose any single path or a combination of paths to attain the ultimate goal. The 4 paths are Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion; Karma Yoga, the yoga of action; Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge and wisdom; and Raja Yoga, the yoga of body and mind. Now, it is called the royal path because, just like controlling a kingdom, Raja Yogi learns to control their mind and body. Although all of these lead to the same ultimate goal, Shri Kṛṣṇa will go on to proclaim in chapter 6 that the easiest among these is Bhakti Yoga. 2.22 to 2.30. So in the previous episode, we discussed Krishna's teachings about the various aspects and qualities of the soul. And we discussed how the soul was Sat, or never changing, whereas everything else in the material world was Asat, or ever changing. We will continue that discussion in today's episode. So just as a reminder, the body is temporary. The soul keeps discarding old bodies and getting into new bodies based on its accumulated karma and desires. Please keep in mind that our desires also determine where and how we will be born in the next life. So we should be very careful about what we desire. It is best to always desire only for the ultimate realization and mukti. Otherwise, we will keep getting stuck in the cycle of life and death, just like the water which is stuck in the cycles of the fountain going up and down eternally. The concept of reincarnation based on karmic accounts is very important in Vedanta. There is no other explanation for why some people are born into poverty while others are born into rich families, or why some are born sick while others are born strong, etc. Srila Prabhupada quotes from the Upanishads that our soul and the super soul, which is Krishna, are like two birds sitting in a tree. Our soul, which is the soul bird, is busy enjoying the fruits of the tree and getting into a lot of emotional turmoil along the way. Whereas the super soul bird, which is Krishna, is merely observing the soul bird and all the time available to share wisdom, mercy, and grace. The soul bird has to just remember to look at the super soul bird and seek guidance. Guidance is always there. We just have to seek it. The individual soul is eternal, everlasting. The eternal nature of the soul is confirmed by Krishna when he says that weapons cannot cut the soul, fire cannot burn it, water cannot wet it, and the wind cannot dry it. The Advaita philosophy says that the individual souls merge with the super soul and become the super soul, just like drops of water merging into the ocean and becoming the ocean. However, some scholars are of the opinion that the individual souls return to the abode of the super soul but never become one with the super soul. Now, this debate has been going on for ages between scholars, and in my humble opinion, it doesn't really matter who wins the argument. What is important is to realize that there is a super soul and that we need to practice bhakti yoga to help our soul get reunited with the super soul. The great philosopher and poet Khalil Gibran wrote a beautiful poem about this topic. The name of the poem is Fear, and let me read the poem to you. It is said that before entering the ocean, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has traveled, from the peaks of the mountains, the long winding road crossing forests and villages, and in front of her, she sees an ocean so vast that to enter there seems nothing more than to disappear forever. But there is no other way. The river cannot go back. Nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean, because only then will fear disappear. Because that's where the river will know it's not about disappearing into the ocean, but of becoming the ocean. Such a beautiful poem. That is the Advaita philosophy. Our soul is like the river, and the super soul is like the ocean. Our soul has to eventually enter and get merged into the super soul. The great Greek philosopher Socrates was condemned to die by drinking poison. While he was holding the cup, everybody was crying. The only person who was calm was Socrates himself, because he understood that he was not the body. When another person asked him, "Socrates, how shall we bury you?" Socrates replied, "Well, you will have to first catch the real me." During his commentary on these verses, Swami Mukundananda quotes from the Nyaya Darshan, one of the 6 schools of philosophy, which gives the following argument to prove the existence of rebirth. It says that if you observe a little baby, you will find it sometimes becomes happy, sometimes sad, and sometimes fearful without any apparent reason. According to the Nyaya Darshan, the little baby is remembering its past life and hence experiencing these emotions. However, as it grows up, the impressions of the present life are imprinted so strongly upon its mind that they erase most past memories. Besides, the process of death and birth are also so painful to the soul that they erase a substantial portion of the past life's memories. In my humble opinion, there is one more lesson for us in these verses. You see, the soul cannot stay in one body for too long. It has to get out and seek a new body. But this applies to many things within our body as well. Like the air that we breathe in cannot stay in for too long. It has to be breathed out so that you can get fresh air back in. The water we drink, the food we eat, nothing can stay inside for too long. They all have to be thrown out. And we have to make room for fresh water, fresh food, etc. The same holds true for emotions, especially the negative emotions. We should not keep them inside for too long. We have to throw them out and make room for fresh positive emotions. Otherwise, we are bound to get unhealthy and sick. Now in Vedanta, the soul is described as sarvagata, all-pervading, which means it exists everywhere. So at least theoretically, the belief is that there are life forms even in places like the sun, where we think there cannot be any life form. They just exist in different bodies that we cannot see or perceive. Verse 2.25 specifies 3 attributes of the soul. Those 3 are: the soul is invisible, the soul is inconceivable, and the soul is immutable. You cannot catch the soul, and you cannot see it using any instruments. You cannot try to conceive it, which means you cannot try to define it or prove its existence using experiments. Srila Prabhupada nicely said that if you try to conceive that which cannot be conceived, then what you are left with is just your own conception, not the reality. Our eyes, made from material energy, can see only material objects. The soul, being divine and beyond the realm of material energy, is invisible to our eyes. Scientists have conducted many experiments to prove its presence. They put a dying person in a glass case, sealed the case to see whether the departure of the soul would crack the glass. However, the soul left the body without the glass getting cracked because the soul is subtle. The soul doesn't need physical space for its movement. And the soul is immutable, meaning it is never changing. It is Sat. There have always been some philosophers who have believed that there is no such thing as a soul and that we perish along with our body. Such philosophers were known as the Lokaitikas and Vaibhashikas. Such people existed even during Krishna's time. So Krishna tells Arjuna that if he thinks that the soul also dies with the body, then also there is no reason to be worried, because death is anyway certain. In verse 2.27, Krishna says, "Whoever is born, to them death is certain, and whoever dies, for them birth is certain." So we should get out of this body consciousness and endeavor to get into soul consciousness. The Mahabharata relates an incident regarding this. During the period of their exile in the forest, one day while wandering, the 5 Pandavas were thirsty and came across a well. Yudhishthira, the eldest of them, asked Bhima to go and fetch water for all of them. When Bhima reached the well, a yaksha, or a powerful spirit, began speaking from inside the well. It said, "I will only let you take the water if you first answer my questions." But Bhima was the strongest man on earth, so he paid no heed, and he proceeded to draw water. The yaksha pulled him in. After some time, when Bhima did not return, the concerned Yudhishthira sent Arjuna to see what was happening and fetch water. When Arjuna reached the water, the yaksha asked him the same thing. He said, "You have to answer my question before you take the water. I have already taken your brother. Do not attempt to take the water unless you can answer all my questions correctly." But Arjuna was the greatest warrior. He was the greatest archer of his times. So he also did not pay attention to what the yaksha was saying and just went and tried to get the water. And the yaksha pulled him in as well. The other brothers, Nakul and Sahadev, also followed him, and they all met the same fate. Finally, Yudhishthira himself came to the well. Once again, the Yaksha said, "Answer my questions if you want to drink water from the well, or I will pull you in, just as I have pulled your brothers in." So Yudhishthira, being a wise man, agreed to answer the questions. The Yaksha was actually the celestial god of death, Yamaraj, in disguise. He asked 60 questions, each of which was answered perfectly by Yudhishthira. One of these questions was, "Kim Ashcharyam, what is the most surprising thing in this world?" To this, Yudhishthira replied, "At every moment people are dying. Those who are alive are witnessing this phenomenon, and yet they do not think that one day they will also have to die. What can be more surprising than this?" That was the right answer. And hearing the right answer, the Yaksha was extremely happy and pleased, and he released all the brothers. So Shri Kṛṣṇa explains in this verse that life is inescapably a dead end. And so a wise person does not lament over the inevitable. A good philosophy which we can try to follow is, if there is a solution to your problem, there is no need to be overwhelmed. If there is no solution to your problem, there is no point in being overwhelmed. So in the context of these verses, if the soul is eternal and never dies, there is no need to be overwhelmed about death. If the soul is not eternal and if death is certain, then there is no point in being overwhelmed about death. So what a beautiful philosophy to free us from the fear of death. Shri Kṛṣṇa says that all beings are unmanifested in the beginning, manifested in the middle, and then unmanifested again in the end. It is a cycle. So just as life is temporary, death is also temporary. The soul will find another body, maybe within a few seconds or within a few years after death. So Krishna is again telling Arjuna not to get so attached to the physical body. As discussed earlier, we have 3 bodies. The gross body, which consists of the 5 gross elements of nature: earth, water, fire, air, and space. The subtle body, which consists of 18 elements: 5 life airs, 5 working senses, 5 knowledge senses, mind, intellect, and ego. The causal body, this is the cause for the other bodies. It ties the bodies with the account of karmas from endless past lives, including the sanskaras, or tendencies, carried forward from previous lives. The active senses are the power of talking, the hands, the legs, the anus, and the reproductive organ. The knowledge-acquiring senses are the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the sense of touch. The mind, the center of all the senses, is sometimes considered the 11th sense. And the soul is beyond these bodies. The Kathopanishad states, a teacher who is self-realized is very rare. The opportunity to hear instructions about the science of self-realization from such a teacher is even more rare. If by great fortune such an opportunity presents itself, a student who can comprehend this topic is the rarest. Swami Ranganathananda says that the soul or higher self is the ultimate teacher and acharya. And to realize that truth within us, we have to elevate ourselves and become an acharya-like student. Then self-realization happens. And this has to be the pursuit of our lives. Now, how to elevate ourselves to that level? That is the teaching of the whole of Bhagavad Gita. So we need to pay close attention and make the most of the opportunity to understand each verse and internalize it. We have spoken about karma and how it keeps the cycle of birth and death. We will dive deeper into karma in future sessions. Before that, we should understand the concept of sanskara, which is also important to understand. Sanskaras are the basis of the development of karma. The Sanskrit word sam, which means complete or connected together, and kara, which means cause of action. Every conscious action we perform creates an impression in our mind. The intent behind the action determines how strong these impressions are. And these impressions are what are termed as sanskaras. Some people always tend to think negatively, even during normal circumstances. Some people tend to be violent. Some people tend to be happy-go-lucky and carefree, etc. But these tendencies are caused by the sanskaras inherent in them. Sanskaras influence your thoughts and action, and your actions in turn create your karma. Repeated thoughts and actions strengthen our sanskaras. That is why some habits and tendencies are extremely hard to change. Since sanskaras control our karma and our experience of life, the aim of spiritual practices should be to seek out and strengthen certain sanskaras while eliminating those which do not align with our spiritual growth. There is another mysterious property of sanskaras. They are two-sided, and they will influence you to experience both sides of it. Now pay attention, it's a very interesting aspect of sanskaras. For example, if you keep stealing things, you will develop a strong sanskara of stealing. Now, stealing and being stolen from are two sides of the same sanskara. So, if you have a sanskara of stealing, you will automatically also have the sanskara of being stolen from. So, you will invariably put yourself in situations where someone steals from you. You see, sanskaras are like divine police. They make sure that you experience yourself what you do unto others. This is the secret behind the saying, as you sow, so shall you reap. God does not have to be the police. Your own sanskaras will do the policing. Another example is the sanskara of indulging in violence towards others. The other side of hurting others is being hurt by others. So, if you have the sanskara of hurting others, automatically the sanskara of being hurt by others will also get imprinted in your mind, and you will put yourself in situations where others can hurt you. If you notice, violent people usually have deaths caused by violence from others. So, non-violence is a favor you are doing yourself as much as for the other person. Take care of your thoughts, as they will take care of your sanskaras. Take care of your sanskaras, and they will take care of your karma. Only then can you get on the path of liberation. The good news is, you can fix your negative sanskaras. Bhakti Yoga is the easiest tool available to fix the sanskaras and get on the path to liberation. As Shri Kṛṣṇa says in the 9th chapter, Api chetsu duracharo bhajate mam ananya bhak sadhureva sa mantavya samyak vyavasito hi sa. What that means is, even if the most sinful worships me with undivided attention and focus, they too must be deemed righteous and saintly, for they have rightly resolved and properly situated. That's a very reassuring message from Krishna. Doesn't matter how much we have sinned, or doesn't matter how bad we have been, we still have the potential to erase all our negative karmas and reach the Lord's abode. Verses 2.31 to 2.37. So again, today we are going to cover verses 2.31 to 2.37. And in these verses, Lord Shri Kṛṣṇa reminds Arjuna of his duties as a Kshatriya. A Kshatriya basically means a warrior. And he tells him that as a Kshatriya, it was his duty to fight for dharma and for the protection of people from adharmic forces. Here, Krishna uses the term Swadharma, which means one's duty as an individual in accordance with the Vedas. Now, there are two types of Swadharmas, Paradharma or spiritual duties, and Aparadharma, which are material duties. Considering oneself to be the soul, the prescribed duty is to love and serve God with devotion. This is called Paradharma. The Vedas also prescribe duties based upon one's ashrama or station in life, and varna, occupation. These are called aparadharma or mundane activities or mundane duty. By occupation, Arjuna was a warrior, and so His occupational duty as a warrior was to fight for the protection of dharma. Shri Kṛṣṇa is calling this Swadharma, or prescribed duty at the bodily level. He tells Arjuna that a righteous war is actually a great opportunity for a Kshatriya like Arjuna to earn glory and good karma. Now we need to understand that this material world is dualistic in nature. It may sound very philosophical. However, the fact is we cannot perceive light unless we have perceived darkness. We cannot perceive strength unless we have perceived weakness. And we cannot perceive goodness until we have perceived badness. As Swami Vivekananda explains in his lectures on Karma Yoga, if you are doing good to someone, you should actually be grateful to the other person for giving you an opportunity to serve them. Now, you may be prosperous. However, it becomes a source of good karma to you only when there are people who are in need who give you the opportunity to serve them. Otherwise, what good is your prosperity? How can you get good karma out of your prosperity? So what is good karma and bad karma? How do you determine whether what you are doing is indeed good karma? The chapter 3 of Bhagavad Gita is all about karma yoga, and we will go into more details there. For now, let us understand that the law of karma states that actions result in consequences. Good actions aligned with dharma, termed as punya, results in happiness, which is known as sukha. Whereas bad actions aligned with adharma, termed as papa, result in unhappiness or dukkha. Now the universe maintains a record of all our karma, good and bad. There are basically 3 types of karmic accounts that the universe maintains for each of us. These are sanchita karma, which are our accumulated karmas from past lives. And prarabdha karma is the destiny which we are born with. It contains a part of our sanchita karma. And kriyamana karma is the karma that we generate in this lifetime using our free will. Let's take an example. Let's say that you have $10,000 in your bank account. Now that is your sanchita karma. Now let us say that you are planning a vacation to a foreign land, and based on your bank balance, your financial advisor tells you that you can use up to $5,000 for expenses during that trip. Now that $5,000 becomes your prarabdha karma, or the karma or the destiny with which you are born. Now once you are in the foreign land, suppose you decide to work in a restaurant and earn a few dollars while you are there, that becomes your kriyamana karma, or the karma that you generated. Your prarabdha and sanchita karma are kind of fixed. They determine your destiny. However, your kriyamana karma is not fixed. That is entirely in your hands. You decide whether you create good karmas or bad karmas in your current life. By constantly practicing goodness and good karma, we can slowly change the course of our life. You see, destiny determines the situation that comes to us. But how we respond to those situations, that is our choice. That is free will. And how we choose to respond determines our future destiny. Now, there is a wonderful movie called The Groundhog Day, where the main actor is shown as being forced to repeat living the same day of his life again and again. Each day he tries different things, both good and bad, and finds himself stuck in this endless cycle of the same day repeating again and again. He gets extremely frustrated. And finally he realizes that he is supposed to learn the true value of life. Only when he actually learns the value of life and what is important in life, like sincerity, compassion, love, etc., the cycle stops and then he finds peace. It is kind of similar for all of us, where we will keep getting born in the material world again and again until we learn our lessons and clear our karmic accounts. Instead of adopting a victim mindset, we should adopt a mindset of empowerment. Anytime we face difficulties, we shouldn't blame God or situations. Instead, we should realize that this is a result of our own karma and our own choices that we have made so far. We have to learn the lesson. We have to introspect on what improvements we need to make in ourselves. And we need to try and change the course of our life that way. That will change everything. We have to believe it. Actions aligned with dharma and sattva gunas like truthfulness, non-violence, compassion, etc., they would constitute good karma. As said in many scriptures, we should strive to align with the will of God. Then we will avoid generating any bad karma. There is a nice little story. There was a landlord in a small village in South India who had a beautiful house and a compound wall surrounding the house. He would keep painting the compound wall and get very angry at anybody who scribbled anything on it or made it dirty in any way. He used to threaten the children of the village that he would beat them up if they dared dirty his wall or wrote anything on his wall. The villagers were very scared of him and they stayed away from his house and from his wall. However, one small boy once had the courage to actually go and scribble something on the wall. Very surprisingly, this landlord actually looked happy and rewarded him for doing that. The villagers were very surprised. They were like, what happened to this guy? Instead of getting angry, he's all friendly and he's actually rewarding this boy. What is happening? So they went to inspect the wall to see exactly what this boy had scribbled. And there they see that the boy had scribbled, please keep this wall clean and do not dirty it. You see, the act of scribbling itself doesn't determine good or bad karma. The intent matters. In this instance, the boy's actions were aligned with the will of the landlord, and so it did not cause him any misery. Similarly, as long as our actions are aligned with dharma and the will of God, we will avoid sinning and generating bad karma. A very important aspect to understand here is that we don't incur bad karma by just doing something wrong. We incur bad karma even if we refuse to do what is right, what is required of us, what is our duty. So if a warrior chooses to run away from the battlefield, it will be dereliction of duty and hence a sinful act. Thus Krishna tells Arjuna that if he abandons his duty, he will be committing a sin and accumulating bad karma. Shri Kṛṣṇa reminds Arjuna that if he runs away from the battlefield, he will lose his honor, and that would be worse than death. In Kali Yuga, which is the current Yuga, people have stopped giving importance to honor, and they are happy to sacrifice honor for material gains. It should be kept in mind that leading an honorable life is in alignment with our higher self, and we should always strive to do so. In verse 37, Shri Kṛṣṇa is addressing Arjuna as Kaunteya, son of Kunti. He is doing this to remind Arjuna of his Kshatriya lineage and tells Arjuna, Arjuna, give up this cowardice and face up to your problems. This applies to all of us. When faced with problems, it is natural to feel afraid. However, we should remind ourselves that fear is not a virtue, and we should strive to rise above our fears and face our problems head on. It has to be kept in mind that Arjuna was the fiercest of warriors of his time. He had even defeated Lord Shiva once, and Shiva was very pleased with Arjuna and gifted him with the powerful Pashupatastra, which is a very lethal weapon. Such a great warrior is also becoming a victim of fear. So fear is indeed a very powerful enemy. we should be aware of it, and we should make sure we do not fall victim to it. Shri Kṛṣṇa is also saying that if you face your problems and overcome them, in other words, if Arjuna faces his problems, if Arjuna fights the war and wins the war, he will enjoy the benefits in this world. Krishna says, but if you face your problems and die fighting, then you will enjoy the benefits in the spiritual world. So either way, Arjuna has nothing to lose. Arjuna will lose only if he chooses to run away from the battlefield. This applies to all of us. We lose out only when we run away from our problems. This is one of the reasons why suicide is considered as a big sin in Vedanta. Not just Vedanta, there are many other cultures who consider suicide to be a sin. It is for this very reason, because suicide is an act of running away from our problems, which is strongly not recommended by Krishna. Now, this divine knowledge is coming directly from Krishna. We can utilize this knowledge to progress in the spiritual path and attain liberation. However, just knowledge alone is not sufficient. As described in the Vedas, we need a 3-step process to any spiritual knowledge to purify the mind and help attain self-realization. Those steps are, number 1 is Shravan, which means hearing or reading divine knowledge. The second step is Manan, which means repeatedly thinking about and deeply understanding the knowledge that we read. Number 3 is Nididhyasan, developing firm faith and conviction in God and the divine knowledge. We are all getting together regularly and going through the Bhagavad Gita verses. You are all listening to the podcast. I'm very grateful for that. Now, this is Shravan. The next step is we have to think deeply about it. You have to ask questions. You have to introspect and try to really understand the various aspects of this knowledge. That is Manan. And then we should have complete faith in that knowledge. And with this faith and conviction, when we reach out to God, God will also reach out to us and take care of us. That is Nididhyasan. If you do all 3, we can be certain of spiritual progress leading to self-realization. As an example, when we read Shri Kṛṣṇa's instruction that one should always do their duty, we should then think deeply about this and try to understand, okay, so what exactly is my duty? You need to find an answer for that. What kind of activities are in alignment with our duties and which ones are not in alignment? And then, once you get the understanding, you should start practicing doing your duties with the firm belief and faith that it will lead you towards spiritual progress and self-realization. That is the key. Now, from verse 38 onwards, Krishna will start explaining his original philosophy based on practical Vedanta and how we can apply it for human development. So in the next episode, we will start from verse 2.38, verses 38 to 47. In the previous verses, Shri Kṛṣṇa told Arjuna, give up this cowardice and face up to your problems. This applies to all of us. We should remind ourselves that fear is not a virtue. We should rise above our fears and face our problems head on. Shri Kṛṣṇa explained why it was important for us to do our duties, which impacts our karma. Shri Kṛṣṇa now moves deeper into the science of karma. Arjuna had expressed his fear that by killing his enemies, he would incur sin. So here Shri Kṛṣṇa is telling Arjuna that he should engage in the battle just for the sake of duty. He is telling Arjuna to keep his mind calm and even in happiness and misery, sukha dukhe, in profit and loss, labha labho, as well as in victory and defeat, jaya jayau. Back in verse 2.15, Shri Kṛṣṇa had said that a person who is not affected by happiness, distress, and remains steady in both becomes eligible for liberation. Here Shri Kṛṣṇa is saying that when one performs action with this calmness and even-mindedness, their actions will not incur negative karma or sin. Shri Kṛṣṇa says that keeping the mind calm in the face of both pleasure and pain is in itself a big part of karma yoga. Because negative karma occurs only when our mind is being controlled by our negative emotions. This is the beginning of Krishna's philosophy. He terms it as samatvam yoga uchyate. Yoga is samatvam. Yoga is about training the mind to be calm and steady. Shri Kṛṣṇa will touch upon this topic many times in the Bhagavad Gita. And it is important to know, because the whole of Bhagavad Gita is centered around training the mind, controlling the mind, and channelizing it towards spiritual progress. And we cannot train a mind which is not calm. You see, animals cannot purposefully calm their minds. They are very reactive to situations around them. Only humans have the free will and the ability to choose their reaction to any situation. Animals do not have this gift. That is why only a human can achieve self-realization. So as humans, we should face this battle of life with a calm mind, and then we can achieve great results. To repeat, calmness of mind and selfless actions aligned with our duties are the secrets to avoid generating negative karma. Even positive karmas generated in this manner will only help in our spiritual growth and liberation. Otherwise, the positive karmas will only help us enjoy the material benefits, which are again very temporary. In verse 2.39, Shri Kṛṣṇa says that I have explained to you Sankhya Yoga, or analytical knowledge, regarding the nature of the soul. Now listen as I reveal Buddhi Yoga, or the yoga of intellect. Krishna says, Buddhi Yoge Tvimam Srunu. When you work with such understanding, you will be freed from the bondage of karma. Shri Kṛṣṇa has already explained to Arjuna, using Sankhya philosophy, the analytical knowledge of the immortal soul. He is now going to reveal the science of working without desire for rewards. This requires detachment from the fruits of actions. Such detachment comes by practicing discernment with the intellect. One interesting thing to understand is that although our ultimate goal is to have self-realization and liberation, if we get attached to this result, then again we get into karmic bondage. In other words, we should not have attachment to detachment. It may sound funny, but that's very important. That is the final frontier of Maya, who is going to chase us until we actually get liberation. So the only way to attain liberation is to totally surrender to Krishna while doing our duties with a calm and detached manner. Some interesting facts we should know about Maya. It is made up of two words, Ma, which is not, and Ya, which is what is. Thus, Maya means that which is not what it appears to be. You see, most of us have turned away from God, and it is Maya's job to make us all turn towards God. Maya is darkness and God is light. So the further we turn away from God, the further we will be tormented by Maya. Even the greatest of saints have fallen victim to Maya. She is extremely powerful and persistent. The only way to overcome Maya is by total surrender to Krishna, engaging in spiritual activities and doing our duties in a detached manner. Now in verse 2.40, Shri Kṛṣṇa assures us that spiritual progress will never be lost. Na iha abhikrama nasosti. Any progress made in the spiritual path using Buddhi Yoga will remain permanently with us. Shri Kṛṣṇa provides another wonderful assurance. Swalpam apyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. Which means even a little of this dharma, this philosophy, will save us from great fear. In the material world, let us say we studied until the 10th standard, and then we die. In the next birth, we are not going to directly start from 11th standard or the 11th grade, depending on which part of the world you are from. Instead, we will have to start again from preschool, kindergarten, first grade, etc. However, any spiritual progress made in this birth is carried forward into our next birth. So spiritual knowledge and progress is the only primary goal we should have in this lifetime. Spiritual progress and our karmas are the only things that we carry with us across multiple births. As per the Vedas, there are 8.4 million or 840 lakh species of life in existence. In humans alone, there are 4 lakh species or levels of consciousness. If we do not strive for God realization in this life, we will continue to cycle through the 8.4 million species of life for countless births, over and over again. So this is our opportunity. Let us make the most of it and surrender to God and strive to make progress in our spiritual path. In the 7th chapter, Shri Kṛṣṇa says that if you surrender to me, the Supreme Lord, then by my grace, I will take you across the ocean of material existence, and I will command Maya to release you from her clutches. That is the only way. We cannot escape from the influence of Maya until we totally surrender to God. We cannot escape from Maya using our own intellect or strength. It's possible only by the grace of God. Even in the Bible, Jesus says, "Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you." James 4:7. In verse 2.41, Shri Kṛṣṇa talks about Vyavasaya Atmika, meaning being determined and unwavering in the path of spiritual progress and God realization. Now, this is a very important concept. Our intellect is the decision maker. Our mind is the follower. For example, once our intellect decides that money is what is important in life, the mind will keep craving for money all the time. Those who are resolute on the path of spirituality need to have an intellect which is focused and not distracted and going in multiple directions and going behind material things. Because our intellect possesses the ability to control the mind, we must cultivate the intellect with proper knowledge and use it to guide the mind in the proper direction. This is what Buddhi Yoga is all about. Please note that in the Bhagavad Gita, Buddhi Yoga is another term used to refer to Jnana Yoga. This is a very important concept. Our intellect makes the decision, and then our mind spends all its life following that decision. So we have to be very careful what decisions our intellect is making. The fundamental goal of Buddhi Yoga is to become liberated from the illusionary world of Maya and achieve self-realization. It involves questioning and removing our self-limiting thoughts and perceptions. Lord Shri Kṛṣṇa says that the path of Jnana Yoga is very difficult. Bhakti Yoga is the easiest. However, to progress in Bhakti Yoga, one must first totally surrender to God. Jnana Yoga helps us get the intelligence required to realize this truth. So let us spend some time understanding Jnana Yoga or Buddhi Yoga. The 4 pillars of knowledge, as explained by Swami Sivananda, are the prescribed steps towards achieving liberation through Jnana Yoga. These practices build upon each other and thus should be practiced in sequential order. First is Viveka, which means discernment and discrimination. It is a deliberate, continuous intellectual effort to distinguish between the real and the unreal, the permanent and the temporary, and the self and which is not self. Second is Vairagya, which is dispassion and detachment. This is about cultivating non-attachment or indifference towards the temporal objects of worldly possessions and the ego mind. Third is Shat Sampat, 6 virtues. These are 6 mental practices to stabilize the mind and emotions and to further develop the ability to see beyond the illusions of Maya. These are Shama, which is tranquility, calmness; Dhamma, restraint, control; Uparati, withdrawal and renunciation; Titiksha, endurance and forbearance; Shraddha, which is faith and trust; and Samadhana, which is focus and concentration. And the 4th major pillar is Mumukshutva, which is longing or yearning, which is an intense and passionate desire for achieving liberation from suffering. In order to achieve liberation, one must be completely committed to the path, with such longing that all other desires fade away. Shri Kṛṣṇa says that people with scattered minds keep running behind worldly pleasures and keep falling. They have no chance of attaining liberation. Krishna is advising us to sharpen our intellect using Buddhi Yoga and to control the mind using such a focused intellect to succeed on the spiritual path. So let us sharpen our intellects using Buddhi Yoga. Let us use this intellect to focus our minds on the spiritual path and finally surrender to Krishna and succeed and attain liberation. Well, let us study the verses 2.45 to 2.47. The Vedas deal with 3 gunas of nature, which are tamasic, which means mode of ignorance; rajasic, which is the mode of passion; and sattvic, which is the mode of goodness. God is beyond these gunas. Shri Kṛṣṇa is telling Arjuna to understand that the goal of all the teachings of the Vedas is to realize this God. He is asking Arjuna to focus on self-realization, which will lead him towards God realization. A point to be noted is that we should not be reading the Vedas and other spiritual texts with the intent of becoming a scholar of these texts. That should not be the goal. What is actually important is that we understand and implement the knowledge to attain self-realization. This is what we termed as Nididhyasan previously. Shri Kṛṣṇa is also saying that the Vedas are like a water tank full of water. However, what need is there for a water tank when you have a flood of water everywhere? So he's saying we should approach the Vedas and all forms of spiritual knowledge with that perspective, that we are studying these only for the purpose of spiritual growth and self-realization. Once we attain self-realization, we no longer require any of those books or scriptures. And now comes the most iconic and popular verse of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the verse 2.47. This verse has been quoted countless times by many seers, sages, and scholars since time immemorial. This verse conveys the central idea behind most other teachings in the Gita. The verse says, Karmanye vadika raste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala hetur burmo te sangotsava karmani. Which means you are entitled to perform rightful actions, but you are never entitled to the fruits of your actions. Never be motivated by the fruits of actions, nor be attached to inaction. This is a very powerful verse and very insightful verse. If we can understand this one verse thoroughly, I think we would have understood a big part of Bhagavad Gita. We are instructed by the Lord to always focus on our duties and rightful actions. All sorts of anxiety and stress occur only when we fret about the results of our actions. Now, we all have that one friend or relative who is always depressed, saying, I did so much for everybody, I gave so much to people, but what have I received in return, so on and so forth. You see, the happiest people are those who never seek or worry about credit for their actions. They just do what they want to do. They just do what they think is right, and then they move on. In chapter 3, Lord Krishna will talk more in detail about Karma Yoga, and we will revisit this verse then. So here we have the third pragma, or third practical tip from Krishna, which is always choose rightful action over inaction. never be attached to the results of your work. Detachment from results is the way to a happy and painless life. If you reflect on your own life, you will realize that most of your painful memories are based on either something unexpected happening or something expected not happening. Expectation is always the cause. Many Western and Eastern philosophies have established this fact over and over again. Even in Buddha's teachings, one of the four noble truths is that the cause of all suffering is attachment. If you look at nature, you will see such detached actions everywhere. The honeybees gather honey, but have you ever come across a honeybee which was looking depressed because someone else was enjoying the honey that it gathered? Have you ever come across a hummingbird which stopped singing because nobody was listening? We have to learn from nature on how we should perform our duties without any expectations or attachments to the results. It becomes easier to practice this when we have gained some mastery over the first two pragmas, or the first two tips that Shri Kṛṣṇa had given earlier in the Bhagavad Gita. Your good self or higher self always wants to do good deeds. However, the saboteur within will either prevent us from doing them, or it will make us feel bad about doing good deeds by making us focus on the results of the actions. So I hope this all makes sense. And in chapter 3, we are going to dive deeper into karma yoga and learn more insightful truths about the nature of karma. Verse 2.48 to 2.57. So in the previous episode, we discussed, especially in 2.47, that Krishna wants us to do our duties without being attached to the results. We can see that everything in nature is practicing verse 2.47. Karmanyeva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala heturburma te sangotsava karmani. The animals, trees, oceans, sunshine, rain, etc., they're all doing what they're supposed to be doing without worrying about the outcome. So the question is, why is it so difficult for humans to perform our actions without attachment to results? The simple answer is our massive ego. It is the ego which makes us get attached to results, because we like to say, I did it or I accomplished it. So why is this ego bad? See, basically we are a tiny spark of the Supreme God. However, we cannot succeed in realizing the Supreme God as long as we are engrossed in our own self. Once we detach from our small I, we start realizing the big I. In 2.48, Shri Kṛṣṇa says, Yogesta kuru karmani sangam tyaktva dhananjaya siddhya siddhyo samabhutava samatvam yoga uchyate. Be steadfast in the performance of your duty, O Arjuna, abandoning attachment to success and failure. This evenness of mind is also known as yoga. Swami Mukundananda says, if you are sailing in the ocean in a boat, it is natural to expect the waves of the ocean to shake the boat. If we get disturbed each time a wave rocks the boat, our miseries would be endless. Imagine you are in a plane high in the sky when a storm breaks out. Now you cannot stop the plane, and you definitely can't stop the storm. So the best option is to stay calm so that you can take the right action at the right time. Life is just like that. And this is what Krishna is advising in 2.48. Now, how to develop this calmness of mind? Our scriptures talk about Sama and Dhamma. Sama means control of our mind, and Dhamma means control of our senses. Once we practice Sama and Dhamma, we will achieve Samatvam, which means calmness and equanimity of the mind. The mind will sometimes say, if only I get that car, I will be so happy. If only I get that watch, I will be happy, so on and so forth. On the other hand, it will say things like, what if I get into an accident? What if I become totally broke tomorrow, etc. So we need to train our mind to not have expectations of if onlys and not have the fear of what ifs. And we should restrain our senses and direct them towards God. This is how we attain samatvam. Now this word samatvam is extremely important, and Krishna will keep repeating this throughout the Bhagavad Gita. Now Krishna has spoken about the importance of an even and calm mind in 2.15, 2.38, and here again in 2.48. He has also spoken about how we should use Buddhi Yoga to control our mind. So we need to use Buddhi Yoga to train our mind to be calm in all situations, and then keep our ego under check by totally surrendering to Krishna. We should then do our duties and perform rightful actions without getting attached to results. If you have small children at home, this is the best lesson we can teach them. Don't always give them everything they ask for. Sometimes say no to a few things and train them to not get upset when they don't get whatever they want. This will teach them to cultivate samatvam from an early age, which is a priceless lesson. This would be a wonderful training for them. It's very important to realize that even good karma, if performed with attachment, will prevent us from getting liberation. Only by surrendering to Lord Krishna and performing our duties without being attached to the results, we can attain liberation from the karmic effects, both good and bad. If we don't follow this, we will keep getting stuck in countless births based on our karmic account. In 2.51, Shri Kṛṣṇa explains the benefits of practicing Buddhi Yoga. He says that those whose intellects have become steadfast with spiritual knowledge understand that God is the supreme enjoyer of everything. So they renounce their attachment to the fruits of their actions and offer everything to God. Whatever results, outcomes, or fruits that come back, they accept it as a prasad from God. In doing so, their actions become free from karmic reactions that bind one to the cycle of life and death. Then Shri Kṛṣṇa says, Yadate moha kalilam buddhir vyatitarishyati tada gantasi nirvedam shrotavyasya shrutasya cha. Kalilam means darkness, and it also means a dense forest. Moha Kalilam means a dense forest of delusion. Illusion is when the mind makes up its own images and stories. Delusion is when the mind gets too attached to its own beliefs, even when it can see contradicting evidence. So Krishna is saying that our intellect needs to learn to navigate and get out of the dense forest of delusion. In a dense forest, there are no signboards. We don't know which direction we are going, whether we are coming out of the forest or going deeper into it. Just like that, if you try to read up all the scriptures and try to perform various rituals with the expectation of getting specific benefits, it would be like trying to navigate the dense forest and getting lost in it. We must use our intellect to understand that the purpose of all the various scriptures is to help us achieve self-realization. Without this understanding, if we merely read the scriptures and follow the rituals, then it is like going in circles inside the dense forest. On the contrary, if we surrender to Krishna, follow his teachings and attain self-realization, then there will be no need for any of the scriptures or rituals. And this is the only way to get out of the dense jungle of illusion. Now, a point to note is that Shri Kṛṣṇa is specifically referring to the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas. The Vedas are divided into 3 sections or kandas, namely Karma Kanda, Jnana Kanda, and Upasana Kanda. The Karma Kanda is all about rituals meant to give you some benefits. For example, there are rituals for getting a male child, rituals for getting wealth, rituals for getting a wife, etc., etc. Shri Kṛṣṇa is advising that we should not get caught up in this jungle of cause and effect. Throughout the Gita, Shri Kṛṣṇa emphasizes the importance of spiritual growth. People just go to a temple and pay the pujari a few rupees to get some puja done. This is not helping in spiritual growth. This is just an action performed with specific expectations. Likewise, we should not get distracted by various people saying various things. Like someone says, God will be happy if you wear yellow clothes on a Thursday, or you will get good luck if you throw a coin in the pond, etc. And on the contrary, some so-called scientists will tell you that there is no God and there is no such thing as luck. Shri Kṛṣṇa is saying that we should not get attached to rituals intended to give us some specific results. He's saying that we should not let our intellect be tossed around by conflicting opinions. Instead, we should practice samatvam and focus our mind on God, performing all rightful actions without being attached to the results. As you begin to practice samatvam and perform your duties without attachment to results, you should try to keep track of your attachment to material objects. You will begin to observe that slowly, your attraction to the material world will start to weaken. This is what is referred to as vairagya. It is very important for spiritual growth. Shri Kṛṣṇa says that practicing samatvam, performing our duties without attachment to results, and developing vairagya is the way by which we can help free ourselves from this moha kalilam and go towards the path to liberation. I'll give you an analogy. Imagine that you are fast asleep and having a bad dream where you are facing many demons and other difficulties. In the dream, someone tells you that your goal is to realize your true self and realize that this is just a dream. They tell you that your real self is actually sleeping on a cozy bed in a nice house. Now you keep searching for that bed and house in your dream. Are you going to find it there? No. No matter how much you search, you will never find the bed as long as you are in the dream. The only way to find it is by calming your mind and using your intellect to tell your mind that this is a dream and I have to wake up in order to realize my higher self. Life is just like that. It's a more realistic dream. Your goal is to realize your true self, and in order to do that, you have to use your intellect. You have to calm your mind, become Sthita-prajna, and surrender to Krishna, and He will help you wake up and realize your true self. Now from verse 2.55 until the end of the chapter, Lord Krishna explains the qualities of a person who is Sthita-prajna. So it would help to revise whatever we have learned until now before we get into those details. In 2.54, Arjuna asks Krishna how he can identify somebody who is Sthita-prajna. A Sthita-prajna basically means one whose mind is calm and fixed in divine consciousness. Arjuna asks, how does this person talk? How does this person walk? This is a very good question by Arjuna because it is not easy to make out what a person really is just by looking at their external appearances. For example, there could be someone who is wearing religious clothes, wearing religious symbols, quoting from the religious texts, etc., but who actually has a lot of negativity and ignorance within. Conversely, there could be someone who looks very ordinary, who wears poor clothing, who speaks simple language, and still be an enlightened person within. A great example was Shirdi Sai Baba, who used to live such a simple life. He never used to quote any mantras or recite any Sanskrit verses, etc. And many people refused to believe that he was a saint. However, we all know that he was such a perfected soul and a Mahayogi. So it is important to understand what are the traits of someone who is a Sthita-prajna. Starting from 2.55 until the end of chapter 2, Shri Kṛṣṇa will explain the aspect of someone who is Sthita-prajna. So we can touch upon few of those aspects today. Shri Kṛṣṇa says that when one discards all selfish desires and cravings of the senses that torment the mind and becomes satisfied in the realization of the higher self, such a person is said to be Sthita-prajna. We need to restrain our senses, otherwise they will make us run behind illusions all our lives. We need to stop our mind from keeping on saying, I want this, I want this, I want more, etc. This world has been called Mrigatrishna in the scriptures, meaning like the mirage seen by the deer in a hot desert. See, in a hot desert, the deer thinks it sees water in the distance and it starts running towards it. However, the mirage of water appears only at a distance and you can never reach it. The deer eventually dies thirsty and exhausted. Swami Mukundananda mentions a verse from the Garuda Purana which says, a king wishes to be emperor of the whole world. The emperor aspires to be a celestial god. The celestial god seeks to be the king of gods. And the king of gods desires to be Brahma. Yet the thirst for material enjoyment does not get satisfied. It is not easy to get rid of desires, and we need the help of Krishna here. As we get more and more established in Krishna consciousness, we will automatically start developing Vairagya. In 2.56, Krishna says that one who is Chitta Pragya does not get disturbed when faced with miseries and does not crave for pleasures. Such a person's mind is also free from anger, fear, and attachment. These are very important things to keep in mind. These three adversaries are very strong: anger, fear, and attachment. People usually ask how to maintain calmness when faced with miseries. In the olden days, warriors were given training on how to manage pain. The simple technique was based on the fact that a majority of our pain comes from the memories of past pain and the anxiety of what pain will come in future. As long as we stay focused on the moment and manage the pain at that instance, then the pain actually becomes more manageable. We can use the same technique to keep our mind calm during miseries. Let us not brood over past painful memories, and let us not live in fear of what miseries may come in future. Let us just focus on the current situation, current moment, and try to handle whatever is there at that instance. Once we practice this, it will gradually become easier to maintain calmness during unpleasant or painful situations. A point to be noted is, just handling painful situations calmly and not running behind pleasures alone is not sufficient. Warriors and even mercenaries are trained to be this way. What is important is that we should also establish our mind in self-realization and perform our duties as a devotional service to God. That is what actually helps us get on the path to liberation. Verses 2.58 to 2.72. So by Krishna's grace, today we will try and complete chapter 2. So in the previous verses, we had discussed the importance of becoming a Sthita Pragya. Now we have to restrain and control our senses. As we discussed earlier, desires are a big hurdle towards becoming a Sthita Pragya. So how do we manage our desires? There is a big misconception that desires will go away once we satisfy them. It is a misconception because although it may appear that your desires have been fulfilled and satisfied in the near term, in the longer term, desires only grow stronger each time you fulfill them. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is stated that fulfilling the desires of the senses does not extinguish them, just as offering oblations of butter in the fire does not extinguish it. Instead, it makes the fire blaze even stronger. Such a beautiful example. So, what the example says is, the fire is like desire. And if you want to fulfill the desire, it's like pouring more oil into the fire. Does the fire really get satisfied? No. When it gets more oil, it grows bigger. The same way, our desires do not really get fulfilled. The same way, our desires does not get fulfilled just by satisfying them. They only keep growing stronger. Now, every smoker who tried quitting the habit will tell you this. Whenever they have a strong desire to smoke, they will say, I will have one last smoke and then I'm done. But guess what? The next day, their desire for smoking only gets stronger. That's why people find it so hard to quit habits like smoking and drinking. So what is the solution? Shri Kṛṣṇa says that just as a tortoise withdraws all its limbs into the shell when it senses some disturbances outside, we should withdraw our sense organs from the sense objects whenever we are troubled by desires. Then we get on the path to becoming a Sthita Prajna. Krishna goes on to say that it is not enough to just control your body and deprive it of the sensory objects, because the cravings will still remain. It is only through self-realization that the cravings also go away. That should be the ultimate goal. Thus, Shri Kṛṣṇa teaches the beautiful path of sublimation of desires by directing them towards God. So, for managing your desires, the step one is to withdraw your sense organs from the sense objects, meaning do not give in to your desires. This will weaken your desires. Step two is to recognize when you are having the cravings, and at that time substitute those thoughts with thoughts of God. Chant the holy name of God. Chant the Hare Krishna Mahamantra a few times if possible. And if possible, engage in some activity as a service to God, like cleaning your space, singing a devotional song, etc. Krishna also gives a warning. Do not take it lightly. Indrayani, the senses. Pramadini, turbulent or agitating. Haranti, carry away. Prasabam, forcibly. Mana, the mind. What Krishna is saying is, managing your desires is not easy. The senses are so strong and turbulent that they can forcibly carry away even the mind of a person endowed with discrimination and practicing self-control. What to talk of common people? There are examples in our scriptures of how even great rishis fell victim to desires. So there is no need to feel guilty about losing the battle. What is important is to keep trying and using the techniques Krishna has taught to eventually win the battle with desires. It is not a 100-meter sprint. It is more like a long marathon. Just don't give up. The great scholar Adi Shankaracharya has explained this beautifully in the Viveka Chudamani, verse 76, where he speaks about 5 animals: Kuranga, Matanga, Patanga, Meena, and Bringa. Kuranga means deer, Matanga is elephant, Patanga is a moth, and Meena is a fish, while Bringa is a black bee. Each one of these animals has a weakness for one sense organ, and because of this, it is trapped and killed. The deer has a weakness for sense of sound. So a hunter can play melodious music and the deer will just stand still, and then the hunter shoots it down. The elephant has a weakness for sense of touch. When hunters want to catch a wild elephant, they usually send a female elephant who goes and touches the male elephant. The male elephant gets so engrossed in that touch that it loses sense of the world and does not even resist when the hunters come in and chain it. The moth has a weakness for sense of sight, which is light. To catch moths, we just light a lamp and the moth flies straight into the lamp and perishes. The fish has a weakness for the sense of taste. To catch a fish, the fisherman has just to hang a bait. The fish just can't resist. It has to come bite it, it tries to swallow it, and it gets caught. While the bee has a weakness for the sense of smell. It is constantly attracted by the sweet smell of flowers and often gets trapped inside flowers. As you can see, weakness for one sense causes these animals to perish. Now imagine the condition of we humans, what our plight is, as we have a weakness for all 5 senses. The only way for us to escape from such major weakness is by surrendering to God and getting on the path of self-realization and liberation. In verse 2.61, Shri Kṛṣṇa says, "They are established in perfect knowledge who subdue their senses and keep their minds ever absorbed in me." As we saw in the previous verses, the senses are very turbulent and have the power to forcibly carry away the mind of even advanced sages and saints. Krishna is giving a tip here that the way to control our senses is by diverting them towards Him. In Srimad Bhagavatam, there is a story of King Ambarish, whose example explains this concept beautifully. Ambarish engaged his mind in remembering the lotus feet of Shri Kṛṣṇa. He engaged his tongue in chanting the wonderful names, forms, virtues, and pastimes of God. He used his ears in hearing narrations about the Lord, his eyes in seeing the beauty of the deity of God in the temple, his sense of touch in massaging the feet of devotees of the Lord, his nose in smelling the aroma from fragrant objects that had been offered to the Lord in worship, his feet in circumambulating the temple, and his head in paying obeisance to God and his devotees. In this way, he subdued all his senses by engaging them in the service of the Supreme Lord. Such a beautiful story and example. In 2.62, Lord Krishna says that while contemplating upon objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them, and from attachment lust develops, and from lust anger arises. See, here Lord Krishna demonstrates his cosmic scientist side. In this, he lays down the perils to avoid and the perilous outcomes in a very objective cause-effect manner. A key point to be noted is that lust is not just about sexual attraction. Any sensory attachment, when it becomes so strong that you feel you cannot live without it, is termed as lust. Unfulfilled lust always leads to anger. And you can never fulfill lust because, by definition, lust is insatiable. Try to satisfy your lust by fulfilling it. It is like trying to satisfy a fire by pouring more oil into it. So invariably, lust leads to disappointment and anger. So here is Krishna's formula. He says, thinking about sensory objects leads to attachment. Attachment leads to lust, and lust leads to anger. From anger, delusion arises, which in turn leads to damage of memory. A damaged memory impacts intelligence. And when intelligence is lost, it causes one to fall down to lower planes, and that's pretty much game over. So that gives us pragma number 4. Let thoughts of God and service to God replace your thoughts of sensory pleasures. See, the key point to note here is you cannot forcibly take away bad thoughts. But what you can do is replace those thoughts with thoughts of God. That's the most powerful and the simplest possible technique that we can all use to control our senses and our thoughts. There is a very interesting and insightful story that is often taught by Zen masters. It goes like this. A senior monk and a junior monk, they were traveling together. At one point, they come to a river with a strong current. As the monks were preparing to cross the river, they saw a very young woman, young, beautiful woman, who was trying to cross it, but she was not able to. She was afraid. So the woman asks if they could help her cross to the other side. Now the two monks look at each other because they had taken vows not to touch a woman. This is very common among monks. They promise they will never touch a woman. But then, without a word, the older monk picked up the woman, carried her across the river, and then placed her gently on the other side and carried on with his journey. But the younger monk, he just couldn't believe what just happened. After rejoining his companion, he was speechless. An hour passed, and then 2 hours passed, then 3 hours passed without a word between them. Finally, the younger monk could not contain himself any longer, so he confronts the older monk. He says, "Hey, as monks, we are not permitted to touch a woman. How could you then carry that woman across the river?" The older monk looks at him and just smiles, and he says, "Brother, I put her down on the other side of the river many hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" Such a beautiful lesson. The problem is not with the sensory objects themselves. The problem is when we start contemplating upon or thinking upon those sensory objects. Once our attention is caught by some such sensory objects, it is futile to try and fight those thoughts, because it doesn't matter whether you say I want or I don't want. Either ways, you end up focusing on the object that you want or don't want. So trying to fight those thoughts only makes those thoughts stronger. That is why we should try and follow Krishna's tip, which is to replace those thoughts with the thoughts of God and service to God. Every time a name comes to your mind, replace it with the name of God. Every time a face comes to your mind, replace it with the face of the Lord. That's the best and only way to escape from the clutches of self-destructing thoughts. We discussed the Viveka Chudamani, verse 76, which spoke about the 5 animals, Kuranga, Matanga, Patanga, Bringa, Meena, and how they had a weakness for just one sense and that eventually destroyed them. Shri Kṛṣṇa is saying here again that just as a strong wind can make even a big ship stray from its path, even one of the senses on which the mind focuses can lead the intellect astray. Very powerful message. So we must strive to discipline our senses and strengthen our devotion for God in order to make progress on the spiritual path. And as discussed in previous verses, the best way to domesticate our senses is by tying them to God consciousness. In 2.69, Shri Kṛṣṇa says that what all beings considered as day is the night of ignorance for the wise, and what all creatures see as night is the day for the introspective sage. The word Nisa means sleep or night in Sanskrit, and Jagrati means awake. So it's 2.69, Krishna says, Ya Nisa Sarva Bhutanam Tasyam Jagrati Samyami, and Yasyam Jagrati Bhutani Sa Nisa Pashyato Mune. What is Nisa to the ignorant person is Jagrati for the saintly person, and what is Jagrati or light for the ignorant person is Nisa for the saintly person. For example, an ignorant person sees light in running behind money and material possessions, whereas the saintly person realizes that as darkness. The ignorant person thinks that they have to always have a full stomach, always eat delicious food, wear great clothes, whereas a saintly person sees light in fasting and disciplining the body and mind and wearing simple clothes. When we discussed 2.51 to 2.53, we read Krishna saying that we should not let our intellect be tossed around by conflicting opinions. Instead, we should practice samatvam and focus our mind on God, performing all rightful actions without being attached to the results. In this verse 2.69, he reinforces that message. We should understand that once we are on the spiritual path, many people will think we are on the wrong path. But we should use our intelligence, understand that what seems right to those on the spiritual path may seem wrong to those on the material path and vice versa. So we should not get swayed by their opinions. We should firmly establish our mind in God consciousness and be steady in our progress on the spiritual path. In verse 2.70, Shri Kṛṣṇa says that just as the ocean does not overflow with waters from rivers merging into it, likewise, the sage who is unmoved despite the flow of desirable objects all around them attains peace, and not the person who strives to satisfy desires. In Buddhism, such a state of mind is called bodhicitta. Anything can enter there without disturbing the peace of mind of such a person. We also saw in earlier verses that one of the main reasons why we are unable to practice detachment is because of our ego. We get too engrossed in our small I, and so we are unable to pursue the big I. Here Shri Kṛṣṇa is saying that the person who lives devoid of sensual longings, free from all desires, without the sense of I and mine, he or she attains peace. And in the final shloka of this chapter on Sankhya Yoga, Shri Kṛṣṇa proclaims the goal of human evolution attainable by every human being. He says that if one attains this state of Sthita Prajna and God realization, even at the time of death, he or she will get liberated from the cycle of life and death and will reach the abode of God. Such a strong assurance. So let us all practice what we have learned in this chapter and seek Krishna's mercy in helping us reach this final goal in our lifetimes. We thus conclude chapter 2. Thank you so much for your kind support. This is a very big chapter. It's an extremely important chapter. So really appreciate you being with us throughout this journey. I thank each and every one of you for your time. And I hope the lessons we have learned so far in this chapter, the invaluable lessons, they help us grow spiritually and make progress towards attaining liberation, which should be the ultimate goal of human life. So thank you so much once again. If you all have any questions or doubts, feel free to contact me through my website, pragmaticgita.com. In the next episode, we will start with chapter 3, which is another very interesting, important chapter. Till then, Hare Krishna.